Here's our quote from the book of Acts to describe what Brother Eggman just referenced. Remember, he's working from the Daniel passage, moving into the book of Acts. Acts 1:9 through 11. After he said this, he, Jesus, was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." Just as the Bible gave clear signs to proclaim Jesus' first coming, this is Brother Eggman, for example, Isaiah 7:14 and Zechariah 9:9, the Bible provides clear signs for Christians to watch for concerning his second coming. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament contain numerous passages related to Jesus' second coming. Let's continue. Jesus himself gave the clearest possible sign of his coming in Matthew 24:30, Mark 13:26, and Luke 21:27 by stating that all the people of the earth would see Jesus coming on the clouds with great power and great glory. Knowing this sign guards against the growing deception that Jesus' coming, as found in Matthew 24, has already been fulfilled, as well as the deceptions of various people claiming that they are Jesus himself. A very good point. We're going to revisit that when we go back. Brother Eggman continues, as Jesus' coming draws nearer, these deceptions, along with others, will increase in frequency and in their power to deceive, even being accompanied by false signs and wonders. Jesus has not come back, nor will he come back secretly. His coming will be impossible to miss. We now just need to prepare for it. Now we've got another chart in Brother Eggman's book. Let's look at this chart. This chart is indicative of the signs of the the signs of the man of lawlessness and the Son of Man. So it's important that Brother Eggman's bringing this information to us. I can pause on this and elaborate a little bit. This is the 7-year time frame of history that we have already been looking at. Notice we've got the beginning of birth pains on the first 3.5 years. Then we've got the midpoint. Then we've got the Great Tribulation and the Day of the Lord on the second 3.5 year on the right side of your screen. Right there, basically in the middle, we've got that arrow pointing down. That is not the rapture. That is instead the sign of the man of lawlessness. He sits in the temple and declares himself to be God, right? Matthew 24:15, as well as 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4. But then, moving along the chart, along the bottom, we see the Great Tribulation commences, meaning it starts with the midpoint, and it continues through towards the end of the week. But then, we have the sign of the Son of Man, with that upward arrow. That's the rapture. He comes on the clouds and every eye sees him, Matthew 24:30 and Revelation 1:7. So this sign of the Son of Man is a visible sign. It's something that everyone on earth will see, and it's also accompanied by a sixth seal sign that we will deal with in time as well. We call this cosmic disturbance. It's that little graphic of a dark sun and a red moon slice and some yellow stars, Matthew 24:29. But then we've got a cloud in that picture. That's because Jesus is described all the way back in Daniel as riding on a cloud. This also is picked up by Jesus himself in a few different places, Matthew 24 as well as Matthew 26. And then I think it might show up in Paul's writings, but it definitely shows up in John's writings in Revelation. So the second coming of Jesus is equated with the day of the Lord's wrath, meaning this is that single event on the far right, that arrow pointing to the right, that's pointing towards off into the distance. That is the day of the Lord, also known as the day of Christ, also known as the second coming of Jesus, also known as the Parousia. So that's the chart. And basically that's going to do it for the book graph at the moment from Brother Eggman, the book excerpts. We might have more later on, but for now, that'll do it for this particular study in this at this look through the book. The saints go up and the wrath comes down. That's the name of the book. Brother AARON Eggman wrote the book. It's available at Amazon as well as black, white, and paperback or a colored paperback. Go to Brother Eggman's website at prewrathresources.wordpress.com if you'd like to get more information on purchasing the book, okay? Now, let's go back through some of the slides and pick up some details that we may have missed earlier. Things that I want to highlight. So give me a moment as I'm going backwards through the slides. All right, so this is the coming of Jesus and the rapture. And first, Brother Eggman gave us a definition of the coming of Jesus, which is called the Parousia. And as I keep mentioning, and I'll use my own second chart to show you this, as I also keep mentioning, using this particular slide, the day of the Lord and the coming of Jesus are one single event that's spoken of univocally throughout the Bible. There's not any first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh coming, etc., etc. There was one coming into the world 2,000 years ago, and there's another coming into the world sometime in the future. So we have one second coming. And yet, the Parousia is one single event that has two significant events that are associated with it. I say two significant events because even if you're a post-tribber, you're going to have to admit that at some level there's a movement upwards of Christians and then there's a movement downwards of Christ that might also include Christians. So you've got some meeting in the air that is unmistakable and undeniable. And that meeting in the air is called the rapture. It is equally the resurrection, meaning they're the same event. So there's no way to deny that. There's no way to get around that. You can throw rapture under the bus all you want, but you can't throw resurrection under the bus. It's impossible. And so why do that to rapture when, since resurrection and rapture are the same event, just depending on whether you're dead or alive at the time when Jesus comes back, why not just include them both as a package deal, since all of the biblical writers do as well? You're doing yourself a very gross disservice to the Bible and damage to the biblical text by throwing rapture under the bus, but teaching that there is a resurrection. That's not good biblical exegesis, all right? So don't do that. So the point I'm trying to emphasize now is the fact that there's one parousia, and yet there are these two significant events that, by pre-wrath standards, are separated by a time frame that allows for the full measure of the wrath of God to be poured out, which, by my estimation, could be as short as 30 days, 75 days, 5 months, or 1 year. There's a case that can be made for all of those. So it depends on what details you want to dig into. But those are some good candidates for the length of the day of the Lord. 24 hours is one that I don't really hold to, but that is one that's a possibility. So as short as 24 hours, but as long as 1 year. That could be that's kind of a big... One day I'll do a whole study on the length of the duration of the day of the Lord possibilities, okay? But for now, just know that even if you shorten it to 24 hours, you still have to put the rapture on the front end of the 24 hours and the second coming on the back end of the 24 hours to allow for God's wrath to be poured out right in the middle there. Unless you're of the persuasion that there isn't any time frame needed for God's wrath to be poured out between these two events, because either the rapture will take place after all those events are poured out, like classic post-trib, right? Let me go back up to this chart. Not that one. This one. Classic post-trib says, notice at the far right of the screen, second coming and post-trib rapture. I'm going to make that bigger. There we go. Classic post-trib says that the second coming and post-trib rapture are at the far end of the 70th week. They're both the same event. Therefore, all of God's wrath and tribulation are poured out in front of that. So we don't need any 24 hours, 30 days, 45 days, 75 days, 5 months, 1 year. We don't need any of those scenarios. We can just let God's wrath take its time. It can take 7 years if it wants to, just like this chart shows. But there are other versions, such as this version of post-trib that has wrath of God drastically shortened down to maybe 3.5 years, and then rapture. And then we have another version like this one, where in the lower left corner, post-trib pre-wrath says that the day of the Lord is only 24 hours long, so rapture takes place, and then day of the Lord is poured out. And then I guess in this chart, we would probably see second coming on the far right. So either way, we're dealing with, when Brother AARON Eggman talks about the definition of the coming of Jesus, or parousia, he, being a pre-wrather, believes that we're talking about 1 second coming, but we're also talking about the details that are described by Jesus that tell us that this is rapture language, but then later on we find language in the Bible that tells us when to be expecting what we might call second coming language. And so most pre-wrathers, such as Brother Eggman and myself, make a distinction between those two. All right, so he went on to talk about the Parousia in his book. He also talked about how that in Revelation chapter 7, that this cloud writing incident that we read about way back in Daniel is picked up by John in Revelation. And this is what is also utilized by Jesus in his own statements to his disciples, that everyone's going to see me coming on the clouds. And this connects me. I'm paraphrasing what Jesus would have said to his disciples. This connects me not only to the Daniel passage, but it also makes for something that all Christians will be able to look for, this coming on the clouds. I believe that Brother Eggman drew these quotes into his notes for us to realize, as we're going to see here let me back up. As we're going to see here later on, he drew these cloud writing verses into his notes to let us know that this is something that indicates that it's not a secret event. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, notice Revelation 1 has cloud writing language. Every eye seeing him. Look, he's coming with the clouds, and every eye is going to see him. And then this is echoing already what Jesus said earlier in Matthew, right? The Son of Man appearing in the sky, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So the sign of Jesus' return could be one of three things, according to what we're observing. We could make the sign of the Son of Man, and I'll put this in post-production because I don't have it in front of me. We could either make it A, the cosmic disturbances, which are Revelation chapter 6, 6th seal, right? Cosmic disturbances. That could be the sign of Christ's coming. Or B, earlier in Matthew, Jesus talked about lightning flashing from the east to the west. I definitely want to show you this one. Give me a moment. Matthew 24, in verse, here we go. Verse 27, 24, 27. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes as far as the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. So notice that this is also a warning that Jesus gives us so that we are not deceived. In fact, if we back up to verse 25, Jesus says, "Behold, I told you in advance." Notice that the force of the language of our Lord is that these warnings are supposed to be a way for us to avoid deception. In fact, earlier than that, in verse 24, if I back up even one more verse, "For false Christs and false prophets will rise and provide great signs and wonders so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect." So within this context of this great deception that'll be happening during this time, Jesus tells us in verse 25, "I'm telling you things in advance that are going to shield you, insulate you from being misled if you watch for the things that I'm telling you about." I'm telling you in advance certain details. And within that context, he says in verse 26, "So if they tell you, behold, he's in the wilderness, don't go there. If they say he's in the inner rooms, don't believe them." Why? As Brother Eggman's going to show us later, part of the reason why we're not to go in those places is because we don't see the accompanying sign of Jesus' true return. The true sign that Jesus tells us about is apparently a sign that can't be duplicated by the adversary. He can fake false Christs and false messiahs. In fact, he's done so all throughout history. We've got tons of people who come and go to say they're the Messiah, and we've got tons of people who come and go and say they're even Jesus, right? Wackos and weirdos who want us to follow after them, but they turn out to be the next Jim Jones or Sun Myung Moon or something like that, right? Somebody who's obviously not Messiah, not Jesus, and is someone like another David Koresh. You're going to be in trouble if you follow after these guys. You're going to lose your life unnecessarily. Well, we are to be looking for the genuine sign. So we could have either A, the sign of the lightning coming from the flashing from the east to the west. That could be one of the signs, right? Verse 27. Notice he follows up of verse 28 by saying, "Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather." I don't think that's referring to the people being taken in judgment, like some people like to imagine. I take this just to be a proverb of the day that indicates this will be something that everyone can see even from a distance. So, but we'll talk about that in time. The second sign that Jesus might be referring to could be here, verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall from the sky and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. That could be the sign of his coming, because this is also something that, number one, the devil can't duplicate, and number two, it's something that every eye on earth will be able to see, right? So we're talking about two different possibilities, something that shares characteristics of A, can't be duplicated by the adversary, B, everybody on earth will see, and C is indicative of Jesus' second coming. So it's got those three qualities, whatever the sign is. It could be one of these three possibilities, as far as I can tell. It could be the lightning flashing from the east to west, like we read about in verse 27. Could be the cosmic disturbance here in verse 29. Or the third possibility of three of three, is that, because he says in verse 30, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, meaning that's the sign. But then he says all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. So verse 30 itself, where it indicates both the sign and the cloud writing, that cloud writing could be the sign. You understand? So we've got three possibilities, candidates for being the sign of Christ's coming, and three aspects of that sign that we need to realize. Maybe I'll make a slide in post-production that details this so you can see it in clearly what I'm trying to say. Three different possibilities. The lightning flashing from the east to the west, that could be the sign. The sun, moon, stars darkening, stars falling from the sky, etc., that could be the sign. Or the cloud writing event, that could be the sign. Or all three. Fourth one, maybe all three of them are the sign. That's what we're talking about. And those possibilities all share some commonalities. One, in no particular order, they are things that can't be duplicated by the adversary to the extent that they're being described by the Bible. Number two, they are things that will be seen by everyone in a supernatural way, because they are of such a large scale that they're something that they're on the scale of theophany, where God is revealing himself to humans, and he knows best how humans operate because he created us. Therefore, he'll be able to activate our senses of everyone in the world at the same time, so that every eye will see him simultaneously, even though we live on a ball, we live on a globe. It's not physically possible, which means he's going to have to bend the laws of physics to make this possible. And then the third aspect of the whatever sign it turns out to be is that this sign is directly connected with the coming of the Son of Man. And this is explicitly stated by Jesus himself right here in verse 30. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And all three of those have to do with sky, right? Lightning flashing from the east to the west, that's a sky sign. Sun, moon, stars behaving oddly, that's a sky sign. And cloud writing, Son of Man, that's also a sky sign. So some way, shape, or fashion, they all have to do with some event that is related to sky. And that's why Brother Eggman brings these up.